And after what we just saw this Sunday, I think we're definitely ready to move on to week 8. There were a ton of busts, disappointments, and of course, more injuries. I'll talk about those and, of course, which players you should be picking up on the waiver wire and prioritizing, and also some players that you can officially let go. Let's start with the injury roundup, and it was full of quarterbacks this week. Well, I can't say that it's all bad news. Let's start with the one that's probably the major one is the season ender, it looks like, for Deshaun Watson. So I'm just going to tell you like it is. Some people aren't too sad about this. That includes Browns fans. Their starting quarterback is out for the season. Look, I'm just going to tell you that Deshaun Watson was the starter, no longer the starter. It sounds like an Achilles tear for him. So Kevin Stefanski might have to actually pick somebody else as the quarterback for the Browns. And we're all really hoping it's Jameis Winston. Although it was Dorian Thompson-Robinson who filled in for Watson after he went out. And then he got hurt himself. Look, Winston's got to be the guy. He just has to be, even if DTR is healthy. And that's what I'm kind of hinging on my hopes on for anything in this Browns offense to become salvageable. The one that looks like a major one, but probably isn't, is Jaden Daniels. He left that game with a rib injury, but it sounds like he's good. In fact, his mom said so on social media. It sounds like it's nothing serious. He would have come back if that game wasn't a ridiculous laugher of a blowout. So Jaden Daniels might be on the injury list this week, but let's hope that he does make it for week 8. And far less relevant for fantasy, Aiden O'Connell sounds like he's got a broken thumb, so Gardner Minshew came in, promptly threw 3 interceptions and no touchdowns. This whole Raiders offense is basically a disaster now. Didn't have their top 2 receivers. That's part of the issue, but there's more than just that. And the starting quarterback for the Dolphins, Tyler Huntley, left with a shoulder injury. We were treated to Tim Boyle for hopefully one final time. I laugh to keep from crying because, as a lifelong Dolphins fan, never thought we'd be here. But the good news is we should have our starting quarterback hopefully back next week. The real big one of week 7 was Brandon Ayuk. And the fear is, Kyle Shanahan himself said, looks like it might be an ACL injury. Took a hard hit to the knee, didn't come back. All the frustration that had built up over the first 7 weeks for Brandon Ayuk, letting down after signing the big contract. Well, you can let it go now because you're probably going to have to let him go. I'll just tell you up front, as far as replacement, who to pick up here, I don't even know. We know Debo, although he missed pretty much all of this week's game with an illness. Like, he's still going to be a top target there. George Kittle is still there, but it's kind of a mess after that. Jacob Cowing had a long catch, but he wasn't really that involved. Ricky Pearsall is active, but it's going to take a while before he is really in the mix. Juwan Jennings was out, but he might be involved. So for the time being, I think we're just going to have to wait on this one for at least a week. DK Metcalf, after having a pretty big game himself, left with a knee injury. He was actually carted off. But after the game, Mike McDonald, coach, said, doesn't sound like it's anything serious, so we're going to hope he's back for next week. And it looks like Juju Smith-Schuster was indeed a trap, left this game with a hamstring injury. He was good to go after being questionable all week, and then he wasn't good for very long. And yet somehow the Chiefs still won despite Pat Mahomes being terrible as a passer and having nobody to throw to. Go figure. We don't know yet if Kyler Murray will be good in week 7, but I do know that if you sign up for Underdog right now, you get a free pick'em of Kyler Murray just getting 1 yard on Monday Night Football. You get this if you are new to Underdog. Just sign up using promo code ENDGAME. You get that free pick. Plus, you also have all sorts of profit boost tokens for the remainder of October. It's Boosttober. You also still get up to $1,000 of bonus cash for your first deposit if you use that code ENDGAME. So who should you be scooping off the waiver wire ahead of week 8? Let's start in Cleveland. Yes, I'm assuming Jameis Winston will be the quarterback, and yes, that is a very good thing. Cedric Tillman was the leading receiver for Cleveland. I can't say he was Winston's favorite target because Winston, remember, only came in at the end of this game. Watson did play most of the first half. DTR did play mostly after that. Winston came in only after the injury, led a late touchdown drive. It wasn't a touchdown to Tillman, it was to Njoku. David Njoku definitely looks playable now, but Cedric Tillman by far had the most targets in this receiving room, 12 targets and 8 catches for 81 yards. Jerry Jeudy, you would think, would be the number 1 receiver. He was almost an afterthought today. Now, we don't know how this is going to develop. I'm not saying Tillman is going to always have the edge over Jeudy. I'm sure Jeudy will be involved as well. But come on, we know what Jeudy is at this point. Disappointing. Tillman has a chance to finally break out, which is why just last week, it just so happened, I talked about Cedric Tillman. Not at all foreseeing that this would be the week Deshaun Watson got hurt and had a season ending injury, but it happened. And this is exactly what I was saying. Things like this happen. If for any reason Winston were to take over, Tillman would be somebody you'd want on your roster. And here we go. So I'm going to say Cedric Tillman is worth adding in most 12-team leagues or deeper. It's not like he's all of a sudden going to be the next Amari Cooper. I'm not going to go that far, but Tillman is definitely somebody you could be interested in. Now, speaking of Amari Cooper, he made his Buffalo debut in Week 7. Actually, not too bad for not knowing the playbook whatsoever. 4 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown on an audible. All right, so we know he's good to go. But a funny thing happened is fellow wideout and rookie Keon Coleman actually jumped up in value because of Cooper's presence. And this is because now the defense will have somebody to really have to focus on in Amari Cooper, a legit number 1 receiver. And Keon Coleman doesn't get the pressure of having the opponent's top cornerback covering him. And we immediately saw those results. He actually led the team with 125 yards on 4 catches, and it could have been better. He had a touchdown, a 12-yard pass that was reversed after it was shown that his foot was barely out of bounds. It was a really close one. All told, Coleman was targeted enough to be valuable, and his targets are valuable because, as opposed to a guy like Khalil Shakir, who also was back and healthy now in his presence along with Cooper. Again, that just helps Keon Coleman free him up a little bit. But Coleman gets those downfield targets, and we know that Josh Allen loves to sling it down the field. Sure, Cooper's the number 1 here, but Coleman now all of a sudden finally has my interest. Again, you have to know what you're getting here. It's still going to be boom bust. I'm not saying this is someone that is becoming a dependable starter, but I think this is finally what it might have taken to unlock him. And also, we're halfway through his rookie season. He's learned a bit. He's got some chemistry here with Josh Allen, and it's starting to show. And just 2 weeks ago, everyone was dropping Romeo Doubs because he basically dropped himself out of practice, didn't want to be on that team for a while because he wasn't getting enough targets, whatever his beef was, who knows. He came back. He was fine last week and, in fact, scored 2 touchdowns. And then this week, well, he didn't score a touchdown, but he did lead the team with 8 catches and 94 yards on a team leading 10 targets. Does this mean we have to be in on Romeo Doubs? I think we should be. What we're seeing is actually a repeat of last year. Romeo Doubs, despite having guys like Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks to contend with, last year, Romeo Doubs led this team in targets. And in the games where he's been healthy and active, he's doing it again. Last year, Doubs had 96 targets compared to Jaden Reed's 94. Reed wound up with 5 more catches, but all told, it was very close here. And both had 8 touchdowns. And Jaden Reed was like a 5th-round pick in most fantasy leagues. Romeo Doubs was kind of an afterthought. In Week 7, Romeo Doubs, not including the late games, has top 10 target share among all wide receivers at 30%. That's a pretty healthy target share for any receiver. And this is a top 10 Packers scoring offense that we're talking about. So even though there are a lot of mouths to feed, he's getting fed the most. And not just these chintzy targets either. He is among the leaders in air yards as well. Again, in the games he has played, he is leading the Packers in that category. Can't guarantee the consistency. Some weeks Watson will have a big play. Some weeks it will be more Jaden Reed. You know how this goes. It's going to be annoying and frustrating, especially when the touchdowns go to other receivers. The Packers, yeah, they're going to spread the ball around, but Doubs is going to continually be involved. Now, on the other hand, you've got the Raiders, and I understand if you don't want a part of this Raiders offense, but Jakobi Meyers does come back healthy in Week 8. You got to consider picking him up if he was dropped. He's missed the last 2 weeks with an ankle issue, and it's pretty obvious that the Raiders need him. Davante Adams is officially gone. Meyers should be the clear number 1 there, and there's really no other competition for targets here. In Week 7, even though the Raiders were down for most of the game and needed to throw the ball, they just couldn't. All Vegas receivers combined 5 catches for 49 yards, and that really was just 2 guys who caught passes. Now, while I understand Gardner Minshew being the guy now for sure with that O'Connell injury doesn't really excite you about the passing offense, go back to what we talked about early this preseason. My guy Chris was all over Jakobi Meyers as a target hog, and we didn't even know Davante Adams was getting traded. But with Gardner Minshew, a guy who, let's face it, doesn't have the arm strength to sling it down the field and now doesn't really have any weapons to throw it to down the field, Jakobi Meyers really could be one of those guys that just eats up those short to intermediate routes and winds up being a high floor PPR option. And believe it or not, I'm going to go with another Raider here. There's just not a lot to look at as far as running backs go on the waiver wire this week. I think we now have to consider Alexander Mattison someone who should be rostered pretty much everywhere in 12-team leagues. Zamir White, after missing a couple weeks with an injury, came back, and it didn't matter. In fact, Mattison got his season high, his Raider high, in carries with 23 for 92 yards. He also caught 3 passes for 31 yards. He'll be involved as a receiver. Dylan Lobb, the rookie, hasn't even been active. He's a healthy scratch. There's really no competition here for him. And even when Zamir White was healthy early in the season, it was Mattison who's the goal line back. So basically, we have a workhorse here. Now, again, not a good offense. Going to repeat that. The Raiders are not a good team. They're not a good offense, but any workhorse back is valuable just through sheer volume alone. It turns out there will be no teams on bye in week 8, but some of you are still hunting for a quarterback because you stream, or maybe you've just had it with your quarterback. Maybe even a guy like Pat Mahomes, Brock Purdy, whatever. You just want some upside in a matchup that might be favorable. Well, let's go to the very, very obvious who may still be out there in certain leagues. Kirk Cousins. I'll say out of all the QBs who let us down in week 7, Cousins might have been the most disappointing because this should have been a smash spot, a home game against Seattle with some injury in the secondary. 232 yardage, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and then they lost big to Seattle. What is going on here? I'm actually going to blame Seattle because this is the team this year that's going to win the games that they're not supposed to win and lose the games they're not supposed to lose. So let's just throw it out the window and move on. Next week is the rematch between Kirk Cousins and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Yeah, the rematch from week 5. You remember when Kirk Cousins threw for 509 yards and 4 touchdowns? That's who he gets this week. Other than that other Florida team, Jacksonville, the Tampa Bay Bucks give up the most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. This is going to be a spot where Kirk Cousins just has to be started no matter who else you have. And I'm going to say, you just have to. I know it's not going to be a 500-yard game. I know it's not going to come close to last time, but still, you've got to take a shot here. If Cousins isn't out there, then you might have a very nice option waiting here because we should finally see the return of Tua Tagovailoa. And let's be real here. The only reason that he wasn't activated earlier, the fact that he was put on IR, is because of the history. It's probably because of the whole PR thing, the look. If they had just put him back out there after a week or two, even though he has shown absolutely no symptoms, they had to do this. They had to sit him. He is more than good to go. I'm almost positive he's playing this week, and you want to play him. As bad as this Dolphins offense has looked over the past month, it's been without Tua. Look, he's still got Tyreek Hill. He's still got Jalen Waddle. And now Jonnu Smith is emerging as a weapon. Oh, yeah, and Devon Achane, too. Yes, quarterback play makes that big a difference. Just look at a team like Washington. It was a mixed bag in the first 2 games for Tua this season, but very extreme in terms of the opponents. First week, he threw for 338 yards and a touchdown. That was against Jacksonville. And then week 2, only 145 yards, 3 interceptions with a touchdown, but that was against Buffalo. And so now he gets the Cardinals. Not a bad matchup whatsoever for a quarterback. So if you're looking for some upside, yeah, you can just put Tua right back in there. You need a tight end? Hey, let's go with Jonnu Smith. Why not? I actually mentioned him last week in this very spot. And if you started him, man, you were thrilled with your streaming tight end. 7 catches on 7 targets for 96 yards and a touchdown. One of the better tight ends of the entire week. Can't say I predicted that. I knew he might have a nice game, but still, that was even better than I had hoped for. I definitely didn't expect that he would have more targets than Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and even Odell Beckham all combined. Now, I can say that's going to be changed next week because Tua can actually get the ball down the field, not just have to dump it off to the tight end. But Jonnu Smith has been coming on. This is a guy who's had a history of being a productive receiver in the league for a couple of different teams, and he's in this Dolphins offense. I think he's still very streamable considering the landscape of tight ends these days. And hey, you might want to just put him out there over Sam Laporta at this point. But I will say also that there's a tight end I like a little bit better if he's available. And hey, you might be able to plug Cole Kmet off waivers. He was on a bye. Some teams just can't afford to stash a backup tight end. It's not like he's an elite tight end, but man, he had been coming on before this past week. Remember, before the bye, he had 5 catches, 70 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And in week 8, the Bears are going to get the Washington Commanders. I know they just made the Panthers look silly, but come on, that's the Panthers. Look for guys like Kmet, like Romeo Dunze, could be a nice pickup. Caleb Williams if we're streaming a quarterback. So I'm just going to say this generally about those Bears players that might have been dropped, but at tight end specifically, Kmet should be the strongest option if he's available. All right, now that you know who to pick up, who are you going to cut to make room for these players? This is the cut list ahead of week 8. We've been telling you to hold on to Anthony Richardson because there's still that upside, that rushing ability. The matchup was great for week 7. Just forget it. You can let him go. Anthony Richardson ain't it. And I'm not going to say we're giving up on him forever, but man, after last week, 10 for 24 passing, not a single touchdown accounted for, 56 rushing yards, okay, still, but if he's not getting in the end zone, which he didn't, that's not helping you. And the other thing is, I feel like this is a player who will forever be an injury risk every single week based on the way he plays. He runs hard, which is good, but also bad. Look, let's face it. If this continues, which it very well may, because look at the next 3 weeks, this is another strong reason to consider just dropping Anthony Richardson now. At Houston, at Minnesota, and then Buffalo on the schedule. And if the Colts start to slide with him at starter, why wouldn't they consider going back to Joe Flacco? The Jaguars may have sort of salvaged part of their season by at least escaping with a win against the Patriots in London, but it didn't help Christian Kirk in any way. Somehow only one catch for 24 yards. Now it's funny because after the first couple of weeks did nothing, we dropped him. It looked like a mistake. You picked him up. He had a couple of nice weeks, and now he's droppable again. Yeah, I think he's droppable again because Brian Thomas Jr. is now clearly the number 1 receiver there, and Trevor Lawrence is clearly not a franchise quarterback. This offense is just not effective. Doug Peterson's probably going to be his last season as a Jaguar, and Christian Kirk is going to be very frustratingly a boomer bust player. He's always kind of been that, but it's only been the sporadic bust here and there. There's been a lot more bust than boom this year. Evan Ingram is healthy. Christian Kirk doesn't seem like a player you really need to even hold on to. I mean, I've been trying to hold out hope for Calvin Ridley, but no more. There's no reason. We thought this might be the week. Changing a quarterback didn't help. Squeaky wheel narrative, right? He complained. He wanted to get more targets. Guess what? He got more targets. It didn't matter. Season high 9 targets for Calvin Ridley resulted in 3 receptions for 42 yards. The upside is just non-existent. This entire offense looks like a mess no matter who's at quarterback. Yeah, and by the way, those 42 yards, a lot of them came on a end of the half, kind of a Hail Mary type of play where he caught it and then pitched it. Yeah, there's nothing going on here for Ridley. He's droppable, and I think DeAndre Hopkins is also droppable. And let's keep going with the Titans narrative. Tyjae Spears, I know you want a running back who could be involved, a guy who's been effective at times when given the chance. When he's healthy, number 1, Tyjae Spears never seems to be healthy. Number 2, he's on the Titans offense. Enough said. And number 3, just to put the cherry on top here, even if Spears does play, the Titans are now going to face 4 top 5 run defenses over the next 5 weeks. So it's going to be tough sledding even for Tony Pollard if he's the bell cow. Tyjae Spears, just forget it. Then finally, I'm not going to say you have to drop Devin Singletary because it still looks like he's at least the 1B here. But how valuable is that in this Giants offense that just looked like a mess? Singletary got 5 carries for 18 yards in his return from injury. Tyron Tracy, 6 carries, 23 yards. Not a big difference there, but Tracy did get more of the touches than Singletary. And next week, going against Pittsburgh on the road, you're not going to want to start either of these guys. So what are we really holding on for here? Man, unless Tracy gets hurt and Singletary comes back strong in future weeks, he doesn't have any short-term value. All right, that's what you need to know as far as the waivers go for week 8. When it comes to start sit advice and more, just check out this week's playlist.